My name is John Alcock. This is Communications 101. This is speech number 3, the informative speech. The title of my speech is The Ponzi. Imagine yourself having worked for a few decades and diligently saving away for your retirement. With a decent chunk of change in your bank account, you decide to take the advice of a few of your friends and invest your money into a firm who promises returns bigger than anyone else you can find. A few years pass by, and you generally forget about the money and take it for granted. You assume that when you retire, the money will be there and there'll be plenty of it. Till one day you come home from work, turn on the TV, and find the headlines riddled with news about a company accused of a Ponzi scheme and headed for bankruptcy. It takes you a moment to realize that that company is the firm you invested in, and without even realizing what a Ponzi scheme is, you just lost your entire life savings. Nobody wants to be the victim of a Ponzi scheme, and for a person like me or you, it could potentially mean losing your life savings and even facing bankruptcy. In this speech, we'll take a look at what a Ponzi scheme is, some recent ways it's been used, and the effects and differences that each case comes with. Let's begin by understanding what a Ponzi scheme is. It earns its name from Charles Ponzi, who in the 1920s made this type of fraud famous. Even in the 20s, he was able to round up millions of dollars in investments by promising a 40% return in just 90 days. As it turned out, he only actually invested $30. The Securities and Exchange Commission defines a Ponzi scheme as an illegal pyramid scam. Basically, it means paying person 1 with person 2's money. Let's take a look at how exactly this works. In a normal investment flow, you would give your money to the investment firm, who would invest their money potentially on Wall Street. And then when you want your money, you get it, hopefully with more than what you initially invested. In the case of a Ponzi scheme, you give your money to Company B, where generally the owner of Company B keeps the money. So when you want your money, there's nothing to be had. So what does Company B owner do? He gets person number 2 to invest into Company B, and they take the money from person 2 and give it to you. Now that we understand exactly how a Ponzi scheme works, let's take away at the look that it's been used lately. In the past few years, there's been a few major cases of Ponzi schemes. The most notable, and potentially the most famous case in American history, involves Bernard Madoff. In December 2008, MarketWatch reported that Bernard Madoff's company lost $50 billion worth of investors' money. His charade carried on for decades and was only discovered when investors seek to claim $7 billion. It was money that Bernard couldn't come up with. Another case, and a little bit less notable, comes from Michigan, where Bruce Kelly of Investment News broke a report that a $250 million fraud had been committed. In February of 2008, lawsuits were filed against Dorn and Mayhew Company, who defrauded the elderly out of millions. They set up false companies and told investors to invest their money into them without them ever actually existing. As is usually the case, when the company started to face bankruptcy and they could no longer send out dividend checks, the jig was up. While both of these cases are similar in the principle, their means of destruction are very different. A Ponzi scheme is devastating no matter what, but the differences between each case is what makes them unique. In the case of Madoff, he targeted mainly very wealthy investors, many of whom were able to sustain the large losses that they incurred as a result of investing with him. He was able to lure people into his investment firm with his good name, his persona, and the very popular word of mouth that surrounded his company. Even after his conviction, there are still numerous ongoing lawsuits against Madoff in attempts to reclaim money that was lost, and there are also a number of lawsuits against companies who invested people's money into Madoff's firm. In the case of Michigan, it was mostly vulnerable and elderly people that were affected, who couldn't afford to lose the $50,000 that most were asked to invest. The heads of the company in this case used house calls, barbecues, and deception in the description of their business practices to lure in investors who are mostly unknowledgeable about the way investing works. While there are lawsuits from this case, they are much smaller and far less reaching. To wrap things up, a Ponzi scheme basically means paying investor 1 with investors 2 money. While they all involve the same principle, the expanse of the fraud and how and who they affect differs from each case. So how can you avoid being victim of a Ponzi scheme? As the old adage goes, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.